Greetings and a warm welcome to this week's edition of 401k Real Talk. This is Fred Barstein, contributing editor at wealthmanagement.com's RPA channel and CEO at Trow, TPSU, and 401k TV. I review all of this week's stories and select the most important and interesting ones, providing open, honest, and candid discussion you will not get anywhere else. So let's get real. First story. In a federal lawsuit, Human Interest claims that senior executives at Guideline use moles to get sensitive and confidential information. What makes this really interesting is that Gusto is in the process of buying Guideline, looking to sell the 27,000 or so plans that are not Gusto payroll clients, which Human Interest is interested in acquiring. Specifically, the lawsuit alleges that two brothers working at Human Interest funneled information about partnership deals, customer data, and strategies to another brother working at Guideline, allegedly with the blessing of the CEO and CFO. Will the lawsuit affect the Gusto transaction as well as the deal to sell off the remaining plans with other payroll providers? Next story. Human Interest keeps raising money, but this time at a significantly higher valuation. Overall, it has raised $700 million at a $1.3 billion valuation as of last summer. But the current $100 million raise is at $3 billion. Guideline has raised $340 million with a $1.2 billion valuation in 2021, selling to Gusto for a reported $700 million plus whatever they can get for selling off plans of non-Gusto payroll clients. With about 700 employees and annual recurring revenue of $200 million reportedly at the end of 2025, Human Interest may be approaching break even as their CEO is reporting a goal of going public, but not within the next 24 months. The record keeper fintech buildup is a direct result of the explosion of new plan formation caused mainly by state mandates, but also because most major record keepers, other than the payroll providers, struggle to service and make money with smaller plans, hindered in part by legacy technology. Next story. While the DC world is buzzing about private investments, a direct result of the recent executive order, not all of these investments are created equally. Morningstar's Pitch Book takes a deeper dive into the different types of private investments and which ones make the most sense for DC plans. PE firms have been the most vocal, with public-facing comments intended to educate and normalize these investments. But PitchBook says that income-producing investments like real estate, private credit, and infrastructure might make more sense because they'd be able to handle redemptions. PitchBook does not see VC or early-stage investing applicable for DC plans. While access to private markets may help boost non-correlated returns, it could certainly help active managers whose fees have declined over the past few years, accelerated in part by CITs, as well as non-fiduciary record keepers looking for additional revenue through placement fees. Next story. Interesting anonymous post by Encore Fiduciary, the new EPSA director's former firm, which insures ERISA plans against lawsuits, commending the DOL for recently pushing back in lawsuits through advisory opinions. Specifically, the DOL has weighed in on a forfeiture lawsuit in a new case, and a case against Morgan Stanley about whether ERISA applies to their long-term incentive comp plans. On the other hand, the DOL has recently asked for more time to weigh in on the fiduciary rule. Encore claims that lawsuits should not be used to regulate plans under ERISA, with criticism about data sharing by the DOL with plaintiffs' attorneys, though Lisa Gomez, former EPSA director in a Retireaholics episode, claimed that this practice is acceptable when there is a common interest. And while industry pundits have been critical of most, if not all, of the lawsuits, claiming it limits innovation, others say that the lawsuits have resulted in dramatically lower fees, making larger plans more mindful while providing valuable lessons to smaller plans and their co-fiduciary advisors, which may not have been necessary if the DOL had been more active. Finally, people are inundated with information, whether through text, email, or video, skimming over what might be important or even essential. These issues are especially relevant for defined contribution plan sponsors who juggle up to 10 jobs and have little to no training, and even worse, for their employees struggling to save for retirement. So how can advisors communicate more effectively and tailor their messaging? Read my recent wealthmanagement.com/RPA column about how advisors can communicate more effectively with starts with not using acronyms and code sections, but also being more mindful, explained in a recent podcast by UCLA professor Hal Hirschfield with Harvard professor Todd Rogers, who wrote the book Writing for Busy Readers: Communicate More Effectively for the Real World. So those were the most important and interesting stories from the past week. I listed a few others I thought were worth reading, covering how private investments could actually depress 401k returns. Government shutdown has slowed efforts to make private investments available in DC plans. There's a disconnect between retirement savers and their advisors. Equitable buys a piece of Stifel, and LPL has retained 80% of Commonwealth assets and is on track to keep 90% of the advisors. Please let me know if I missed anything or if you'd like to comment. Otherwise, I look forward to speaking to you next week on 401k Real Talk.